Well, it's a joy to have you here, Barry. We've known each other for a few years, and you meet someone now and then in life where you just have a click. You say, wow. And yet we haven't had a chance to spend a lot of time together, although we feel in many ways we have similar passions and are similar paths. You'll learn more about Barry in a moment, but currently, for those of you who don't know, he is the CFO and a bunch of other titles, as you saw earlier, for Vontage, and has been part of an amazing turnaround, because when you came in, it was a little bit of a mess, wasn't it? And he's done an extraordinary job. We'll talk a bit about that. But prior to that, he has a fascinating career. For much of your life, you've either been a CEO or CFO from a mixture of startups and publicly traded companies, and are about ready to go into a new adventure, aren't you? We'll come to that in a minute. But first, let's get to know a little bit of Barry the person. You're not a Northeastern, are you? Or are you?
Well, I'm mixed, actually. I don't know what Larry the Cable Guy would say about me, but can you hear me without this okay?
Yeah. Can we just get it right? Sure.
So, my dad grew up in Manhattan, and my mom grew up in South America, and we were raised on a small family ranch in Idaho, where both my parents are veterinarians. So how about that? And just to add to the mix a little bit, my dad is a Jewish heritage. My mom is Catholic. I consider myself a follower of Jesus, and I attend a Protestant church on weekends and Catholic Mass most days of the week. So so
you go to Mass 5-6 days a week, and on Sunday you go to Presbyterian church, right?
Right, currently, right.
I've never met anyone like that.
I'm not. But actually, the reason I do that is, we'll probably talk more about this, but came to really a crisis of faith in my late 20s, and I think that each tradition looks at God through a different lens, and I find that you get a much more holistic view of Him, and find that I have a much richer understanding of Him and relationship with Him.
Well, that's, I think, just a profound, and we'll learn more about that story. But before we jump into that, let's get to know a little bit of you, the person, and sometimes it's good to go back to our childhood. Now, were you sort of a compliant, good little boy growing up, or what was your story?
Oh, yeah, you can imagine. So I was one of these strong-willed children, and in fact, it was so bad. My parents tell me now, after I got beyond the age where they figured it wouldn't scar me to learn the truth, I guess, is that when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I would throw these world-class tantrums.
World-class tantrums.
Yeah. And we grew up again in this little town in Idaho, 4,000 people, so you know everybody in town. On those rare occasions when we go out to dinner at the Pioneer Pack-Out, I would get so mad, I'd crawl underneath the table and just scream my head off. And my parents would look at each other and the people they knew in the restaurant and say, "We love him because he's ours." That was the only reason they could think of. And my mom knew I had this struggle. My mom is actually quite amazing people. She got the Idaho Mother of the Year, and I'm sure in part was for raising all of us, and particularly me. But she said when I was 5 years old, Barry, if you ever want to smoke, don't go to the barn because we'll burn the barn down. And I'm 5 years old, so I thought, I was telling David I did smoke for a while, but I quit when I was 6.
And did you burn the barn down?
Yeah, I didn't burn the barn down because I took my mom's advice. So I said, Mom, I'd like to invite I was in the 2nd grade, 6 years old. I said, I'd like to invite my buddy Randy Crosby over to watch cartoons and smoke cigarettes. And so we did. So
as one does.
As anyone did. So I smoked 6 cigarettes in a row, blew my chips, and that was the end of my smoking career. My mom just knew, don't box him in, just let him go, and hopefully he'll not end up in the ditch.
Now, you have some siblings, right?
We do. There are 6 kids within 8.5 years in our family.
Wow. And where are you in the rank order of that?
I'm number 2.
Number 2. That's pretty amazing.
And I have a severely handicapped sister, Peggy, who actually had a really important impact on our lives. She was number 5.
Do you mind sharing a bit about that?
Yeah, she was born fine, and she had all our family had a blood transfusion when we were born, and she didn't get one in time and ended up with severe brain damage. And I was telling David, as we've gotten to know each other, that she, next to my parents, had the most profound impact on us growing up. And to this day, I think she taught us a sense of acceptance, and that I wouldn't have had before. As a 16-year-old, I remember being in the drugstore in a little town in Idaho, and Peg it must be in the gene pool, because when she got mad, she would throw a tantrum also, but hers were a little more elaborate. I was 16 years old in the drugstore, and Peggy would get mad, and what she'd do is she'd strip down all of her clothes buck naked in the drugstore. And you know, as a 16-year-old, that's not the thing you'd like. So, but you learn how to love and what it means to accept that, and we just care for her dearly.
You know, she's still alive, is that right?
She is, yes.
And you said that early on your sense was how are we going to take care of her, but later it was how she took care of you all anyways, how she changed your life.
Yeah, the faith journey for me has been a journey of ever deeper surrender. And starting as a strong-willed child, as you see, that was probably the right
foreshadowing
for that. And I prayed for Peggy for the first 12 or 15 years of my life, and
for healing.
For healing, yeah,
right.
That she'd be better, and my own understanding, and I realized. Even now, my wife's kind of going through some health issues, and as we walk through that there are just such different forms of healing. I realized that I was praying for God to heal Peggy, and God used Peggy to heal me by really broadening my perspective of people and coming into a place of acceptance. And then I got very involved with helping the handicapped people in college and beyond. So she had a big impact on me.
Well, I really. I sort of get goosebumps when you tell that story. So it's you know, my wife's medically disabled now, so it's a space I didn't really think about much, whereas you had from your earliest childhood. How do you think about that? So that's amazing.
I didn't know we talked about that today, but I guess it just came
Well,
out. So.
yeah, and I'm sure some of you have someone in your life, a loved one that's part of your story now. And you know, it just makes me think also about this. Some of you know I spend a lot of time in South Florida, and we have there's a church there where one of the couples had a Down syndrome child, and it ended up being the biggest blessing for the whole church. And that little girl ministers to all of us every single day.
Dave, a priest once told me that those special needs children are God's angels because they bring out the best in us.
Wow, that's beautiful. God's angels. Lord knows we need those, don't we? You go off to college in Idaho, right?
Right.
And how many people were in that college?
Less than 1,000.
Less than
Actually
1,000.
500 when I was there. I was about to go bankrupt. So.
And you, because your parents were veterinarians, you didn't want to be a veterinarian, but you were going to go to vet school, weren't you?
Yeah, so I went off to college, looked at different places, mostly because it was close to skiing. So you know, it was important. It was good academically. I loved to ski. I was on the ski team. And, the most famous part of the ski team was they won the national championship the year after I got off the ski team.
You paved the way. You paved the way.
But yes, I have a degree in chemistry and biology. Thought I wanted to be a doctor. Loved everything. I really liked all kinds of different subjects, and really wrestled with the question. And the seeds of my malcontent were when in college. We were talking with some of the younger guys before about this, and. I wanted to be a doctor for two reasons. I love the science and I love the idea of helping people. But the night before the MCAT, I decided to go to a dance instead because I said, you know, I don't want to be a doctor.
So wait, so you aren't studying?
I'm not going to take the MCAT. Yeah.
Wow.
But there were two reasons I decided not to be a doctor. One was I came to understand that I really didn't like the nature of the work, giving shots and taking care of people and cutting on people. Really, and it was a gift that I didn't. But secondly was the more important reason, and that was that I realized that a doctor's contribution to society is limited to the 8 or 10 or 12 hours a day that they work. And I became fascinated with this idea of leverage, that if you're working toward the right set of goals, your contribution to society is multiplied by the number of people you have working with you on those goals. And
Do you mind repeating? Hang on. So your contribution to society is multiplied by the number of people you have working with you.
On those goals, and so that if you have the right set of goals, you can contribute to society in a way that goes way beyond one individual. And that was the reason I went into business. I knew nothing about business, and I happened to have a professor who was a retired retired general from the Army, 33 years in the Army, and had gone to the Harvard Business School. And I thought, well, I knew I'd go to graduate school, and he said, well, why don't you apply? And honestly, I didn't know there was an MBA. I mean, that's how naive I was, and from a small little town in Idaho. So I thought, well, I'll apply there. But that was the beginning of the question of meaning and work for me, which has become an important theme.
And we'll come back to that meaning and work in a moment. But first, you're married. How'd you meet your wife? Were you courting for a long time? Or?
Yeah, we met on a blind date. So I went on 2 blind dates in my life. The first one was a disaster. The second one worked out pretty well. We were married for 2 years next year. So So
That's-
yeah, that's
and
how we went to different colleges.
Two sons?
We have two sons. One son who's in law school at Creighton University in Nebraska. We're driving there tomorrow, and another son who's graduated from South Pacific University.
By the way, can y'all still hear? Just want to make sure. Not as well? Let's bring that mic back. Sorry about that. There we go. I think you have to hold it sort of fairly close to your mouth. Meaning and work, you mentioned that. When I was 22, I was not thinking a lot about faith and work and the kind of things we talk about here, everyone. What happened there that got you intrigued with this question of finding meaning in your work?
Well, it wasn't so much something that intrigued me.
Yeah, I think it is. I just have to hold it pretty close to your chin.
It wasn't so much something that intrigued me as it was pain. Yeah, I really wrestled with this question, obviously, of what to study in school, and then went to graduate school. My first job out of business school was I joined a startup company. I had 5 offers. I took the lowest paying offer and joined a company that was 3 people who'd spun off from Hewlett-Packard in a 1,000 square foot tin shed in an alfalfa field in Colorado. So and my wife had put us through school. She said, we spent all this money for this? And but yes, it was all about driving value and equity for me. But starting at that company, Linda and I were both working 60 to 80 hours a week, and we wanted to. It was before we had kids. But I had really wrestled with this question of meaning and work. In fact, my first job before business school was at Hewlett-Packard. And I thought, I'm this small cog in this enormous watch of 60,000 people. If I died, nobody would really notice. So I went to see my brother, who was in grad school at the time, and really wrestling with what to do. I thought about living on the street because our family wasn't wealthy, but we'd never gone without. And I considered doing work with people in soup kitchens or work with young people and so on. And I came back from that experience completely confused about what to do. But there was a real foundational conclusion that came out for me, and what it was the challenge for me was not to live, not to enhance my compassion in the isolated experience of a year, but to live an integrated life, to live that same sense of compassion out Monday morning at 10 o'clock in whatever I did. And there was just something very important to me about that. And coming back, I was telling David last night, I made the first journal entry that I wrote coming back from that trip, and you'll appreciate this. As I was confused about what to do, I said, I want deeply to get closer to God and to include Him in my decisions in my life. Of course, later I began to see that I had it all wrong, and it wasn't big of me to be willing to include the creator of the universe in my decisions and in my life. Strong-willed child. So that question was bubbling up, but it was more like this whack-a-mole game. This question of meaning. It would come up and I'd whack it down and it'd pop up. I never really dealt with it. Right. So after school, I was working at this startup company, working really hard, and got invited to a camp in Colorado called Frontier Ranch. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it sits at the base of Mount Princeton.
That's nice of you to do that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
After you. And I was sitting there, I climbed up on a rock overlooking this camp, and just tears just started pouring out of me and I couldn't understand why. And as I began to look at that, I realized that the serenity of that environment, looking out over the beautiful Arkansas River Valley, stood in such striking contrast to this turmoil within me. I was just sick and tired of living the divided life. I felt like I was
divided, meaning what?
Why am I alive? The question that just penetrated my heart is, why am I alive? By what measure will I judge the success of my life? And I honestly didn't know. And I wasn't suicidal, but I said, I'm not willing to go on living this way. I need to find an answer. And so I read 16 books in 8 months and said, I've got to figure this out. And ultimately went through a process. So what I thought was a question over meaning and work was really a deeper question of purpose in life. And God had to answer the question of purpose in life before He could help me address the question of meaning and work.
And over the years, you've come to can you articulate what your purpose in life is and how that ties back to your work life?
Yeah, I can. It was a long journey for me because I do have this innate strong will that God has had to redirect in so many different ways. So that started a process. I quit going to church. My wife and I had gone to church every week. I decided I didn't know if God existed anymore. I concluded it was hypocritical for me to go to church if I didn't know He existed, so she'd go by herself. I ultimately concluded that I couldn't prove or not prove the existence of God, but I was going to do like the lawyers do, and I would put my weight down on the preponderance of the evidence. So, when I look out, he either exists or he doesn't, irrespective of what I think. So I'm going to just make a decision that he exists. And then the question became, who am I going to live my life for, God or myself? And in fact, I, in that process, went back and reread that journal entry I just mentioned to you, that I want deeply to get closer to God and include him in my decisions in my life. And I thought, oh, I have had it so wrong for so long. I had it backwards. And once I began to realize that I was trying to include God in my plans
Which is
instead
also
of...
kind of you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, big of me to include God. Include him in my plans instead of submit myself to his plans. Once I realized that was the mistake I made, I then surrendered my life to Christ and said, I will live my life for you instead of myself. But it was on a run around a lake with heel marks in the sand. But
that's a huge inversion of thinking. I mean, we probably, I do it myself sometimes when I talk about integrating faith and work, and now and then someone will press me as, well, which trumps which? Which is fitting into which? And here you're saying that it really has to be following God's will as opposed to God helping you out with your will.
Yeah, we will integrate our work into our faith. In fact, I don't think we integrate it at all. I think as we submit ourselves to God and we empty ourselves of ourselves and he occupies us with himself, he is the integrating dimension for us. So that was the question of purpose in life. So it was to live my life for God instead of myself, but it still didn't answer the question of meaning and work for me. And again, being sort of the anal guy that you now have come to know, I won't say know and love, but at least know. And then I wrote 350 pages to myself over the next 5 or 6 years, mostly in the middle of the night, between 2 and 4 in the morning over this question. And what I see as a work of God that had to take me through was just a succession of paradigm shifts. I was thinking about work all wrong. And I'll give you 2 fundamental ways I had it wrong. One is, I was thinking about work from the outside in instead of the inside out.
What do you mean by that?
I thought if I just got the right jobs, then I'll be happy, so that will somehow fill me up.
I've said that before, right?
Yeah, and I thought about going back to school and getting an interdisciplinary PhD in divinity and business because I was fascinated with that. And so my friend said, no, that's not who you are. You should live this out. And this notion of living the integrated life had become so important to me. So that was one thing I had wrong. And secondly, and this was really the central mistake I made, was I was trying to derive meaning from my work instead of bringing meaning to the work. And as I began to see it that way, I realized that the onus is on us to bring meaning to a work and to develop a life-giving perspective of our work. And I began to understand this when I traveled a lot. I was on an airplane to Singapore. And I parked at one of those outlying parking lots, where the cheapskates park. Like me, how many of you guys park at those? Probably nobody here parks at the outlying parking lot. The car drives us right up to the front door now, doesn't it? But I was on the bus, the shuttle bus, and there was this woman, African-American woman who was driving the bus, and she was just looked joyful. And you've been on those buses. Have you ever known anybody that liked that job?
They tend not to look too joyful.
They tend not to look too joyful. So I was the last cheapskate to get off the bus, and I said, do you mind if I ask you a question? She said, no, sure. And I said, do you like your job? She said, I love my job. And I said, well, why do you like your job? She said, I meet interesting people going interesting places. And I thought, she drives the same shuttle bus that everybody else drives. It's just that the way she looked at her job was what brought meaning to it. So I'm on this airplane to Singapore, realizing that you could have a life-draining or life-giving perspective of any job. Take a hospice worker, for example. Life-draining, what? I change bedpans for a living for people who are going to die anyway, and that's true. What about I create an environment of unconditional love in those last few precious months of somebody's life? And both my mother-in-law and father-in-law died in the last few years under the care of hospice, and I can tell you it makes a massive difference how you look at that, and they looked at it in that way.
There's a book by Rabbi Salkin who was in Westchester County, I think, and he also understands work as a calling through the Jewish tradition. And he once asked a taxi driver, sort of similar question you asked this bus lady, and he said, "Oh no, I'm not just driving a taxi." He said, "I'm part of the healing process." And the rabbi said, "What do you mean part of the healing process?" He said, Well, I do a lot of runs to and from hospitals. When I'm bringing someone away from the hospital to re-enter them to their home, or bring someone to there. And he viewed his job as part of the healing process, not as a driver of a car. So how we think about our work, whether a hedge fund manager, whether an analyst, whether a lawyer, a lot of times say, wow, I wish I could get out of that and be in a more fulfilling job, work for a nonprofit, or something that's more visible of helping humanity. Yet you're saying, no, that's a reverse model. It's we imbue meaning with our.
Yeah, so I was at the time, I'd been recruited to join a company called Fluke Corporation. You'd never name the company Fluke unless that was the founder's name, of course. We say if it works, it must be.
I can see a lot of bad puns, but we won't go there.
So I was, CFO is a publicly traded company. We had about 2,500 employees. I was 35 years old. And I thought, why? I'm wrestling with this whole question, so I'm sorry, but creating shareholder value as a CFO just did not get me out of bed in the morning. And at least not with a smile on my face.
Right.
And I began to realize that it was incumbent on us to develop a life-giving perspective of our work. And I began to see it differently. And after a long period of time, understanding that we don't derive meaning from our work, but we bring it to the work, I began to develop a perspective of work which became the working job definition for me for the next 20 years, which was to contribute to a better society as seen through the eyes of God.
To contribute to a better society
as seen through the eyes of God.
That's what you do at work.
And the test for me was, can I connect what I'm doing in this moment, any moment, with my purpose in life? That was the challenge for me. I could not do that. And as I began to see it this way, I began to understand business from a new perspective. And now I see that the fundamental purpose of business is to serve. That business serves society in many ways. We could have a great discussion about that here, but for me, there's sort of four fundamental ways I think about it. One is, first is by responsible value creation. And we're very involved with helping the poor in Central America, and you only have to get off the airplane in Honduras, say, there's something different about this place. How many people have been to third world countries here? Probably most everyone, right? I mean, you get there, so there is something different. Well, one of the differences is GDP per capita, right? And as we know, business is the only thing that creates economic value. Everything else distributes it. So business is uniquely positioned to create value if it's done responsibly. Or think about creating an environment for employees that enables them to grow into the full expression of themselves. I'm a finance guy, so if you do the math, we'll work about 100,000 hours in our lifetime. That's a lot of hours to go home and kick your dog every night if you hate what you do. And we have a lot to do with creating that environment for people, or serving customers. I listen to calls at Vontage all the time because it helps me stay connected with the fact we're delivering cheap phone service to save people money. Or being a responsible corporate citizen. So, when the tsunami hit Japan, we offered free calling to Japan, or when the earthquake hit Haiti, the same there, or Hurricane Sandy a few weeks ago, we had a massive data center, and so we had power on, and we invited people to come and spend the night with their families. And so those are important. So for me, that was a reconceived view of work, which is that the fundamental purpose of business is to serve and to contribute to society in those kinds of ways.
And tell me a bit about, excuse me, obviously if we look at your sort of resume and in the abstract, it's pretty much just from strength to strength of amazing jobs and positions. You were at Nextel as well. Have you ever, if you look back at the times, you go, wow, I really kind of blew something. It may not really show in your resume, but some mistakes, and could you do a mulligans here or there as you look back?
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody told me one time that in the Hebrew, there's not a word for failure. There's a word that means just missed the mark. And I really like that notion. I've missed the mark plenty of times. The most massive miss of the mark for me, I've been involved with 6 companies. 5 of the 6 have been successful, many of them very successful. One was a massive failure.
Is this Brazil?
Yeah, this was Brazil. So it was a large-scale startup, to say the least. So this company had won the license to compete with the incumbents in Brazil. And in order to do that, the company had to build out service in 80 cities in 2 years. So we raised $2.5 billion, hired 4,000 people in 2 years, and built out this massive network. And it took off like a rocket. It was the fastest growing competitive local exchange carrier, I think, in the world. We put on 500,000 customers in 10 months. This was in 1999 and 2000. So any of you who remember the telecom bust, you sort of know how this story turns out, right? We then saw some cracks show up in the operations. I got recruited by the shareholders to move to Brazil to be the CEO. One of the partners decided not to fund the next tranche of capital, which was $110 million. We thought they were going to, but they were within their rights not to. They decided not to. It obviously left a small hole in the business plan. I learned 4 very important words out of that. Fully funded business plan. Don't run out of cash before you get there. It's $2.5 billion just wasn't enough. But long story short, we could see that the business was also having some issues. There were some bad debt issues. We ultimately had to fire 200,000 of the 500,000 customers. I was the CEO, so I had to lay off 1,500 out of 4,000 people. And my wife's only requirement when I took the job was that I have a bodyguard and a bulletproof car, which I did. It was a painful experience, and I got there and thought, this thing, and the stock price tripled in the first year. I thought it might not only not continue to go up, it could crater. And I was just stunned by that. And so the business, by the way, it does say on my resume that it was a failure to the investors, because I think it's really important to say that. We sold it ultimately, but it was at terms that were fractions of the dollar that people got back. But that business failure just paled the pain of that just paled in contrast to the emotional and the spiritual anxiety and angst within me. And one of the things I've really come to understand is that the genius of God's design is that He accomplishes His work in the world and in our souls simultaneously. And He does it through the ordinary experiences of our lives. And this failure, my call was to step into the middle of the failure. And our natural tendency when things get dark is to make the black a little bit gray, to skirt around the edges. And for me at least, the way to the light is to make the black blacker than black, to walk right through the center of the pain. And as I immersed myself in the pain and hung out with Job, weeks and months on end, and I would read Job saying, the very thing I wanted you did not grant to me, which was to die. And I really felt, I wasn't again suicidal, it was like, rationally, it'd be better to be dead, frankly. And as I sat with that, I realized what God wanted to do into me. He wanted to reveal the prison that I was in that was of my own making.
What was this prison? What do you mean by that, this metaphor?
See, unbeknownst to me, I had made achievement my God.
Achievement.
Yeah, and I was a slave to achievement in ways that I didn't even know, and things had always gone swimmingly. And it wasn't until the achievement went away that I realized a big part of my God went away. And the words of Jesus that just penetrated my heart during that time was that any of you who does not give up everything you have, he cannot be my disciple. And I said, Lord, I've given up everything. I moved from Denver to Brazil. I left my family in Denver. I'm working crazy hours. And what else do I have left to give? As my wife and I, she said, we're digging dirt here. We're digging dirt. But what he wanted me to give up was any claim on my own future. Well, he inverted my perspective of time. Instead of plan your work and work your plan and start with the end in mind, are you willing to live fully in the present moment and let me, God, unfold the pattern of your life as I see fit? And I said, strong-willed child, no, 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 no. And finally I said, yes. And then a remarkable sense of freedom came out of that I never knew was possible, and a sense of joy that I never knew was possible, because I really see very literally now when Jesus said, I have come to set the captives free, that I was in this prison and I couldn't see the bars of achievement. And now that I've come to see that, I see that all kinds of prisons that God would set us free from. And my career has been the crucible for the formation of my soul. I have grown more through my career than any other aspect of my life.
So let's pause that a second. A lot of us here, we want to get ahead, right? We want to succeed. We're all about achieving, and yet you're finding it without realizing that there's nothing wrong with wanting to achieve, but you're saying that it become a false god essentially for you.
Yeah, I had the input pipe and the output pipe hooked up to the wrong place. So for me, achievement was an input. I thought that, if I just achieve, I'll get filled up. I'm looking for things to fill me up. Where I've really come to realize that God alone can fill us up, and that we are like this empty pipe, that God comes
into us and through us and out of us into the world. And what God wants to do is he's got to chip off the mud inside of the pipe within me that are all my own selfish ambitions, my own desires, my playing to the accolades of man, and all of that just impedes our joy. And so that for me is what he's had to do. There's nothing wrong with achievement. God created the world and he said it is good, right? And he created man and he said it is very good. And do everything as though working unto the Lord with all of our strength. I mean, I work harder, at least as hard now as I ever did, but it's for a totally different reason. And what God has wanted to do in me was he wants to sever in me the attachments to the things of this world. And for me, achievement was one of the strongest bonds that I had. Wealth was another one. I get totally screwed up if I think about money as a goal to be achieved. But if I think about it as a consequence to be managed, it's totally different. So it's the way of looking at money through the windshield instead of the rear view mirror. If I look at it, if my objective is to do the very best job I can, turn around Vontage, help Nextel Partners be the fastest growing wireless company in the US, if I can do everything I can to help that company succeed, to serve society in the ways that we're talking about, and oh, by the way, it ends up with a pile of money, now my responsibility is to manage that, and that none of our money is ours anyway. We are but stewards of God's money. And so once I began to see it in that way, there was just this freedom because we're no longer attached to the things of this world. And so like when Lynn and I moved to Rumson, New Jersey a few years ago when I joined Vontage, we were going to buy a little condo, and we ended up buying this way bigger house than we need. And we just felt called to nestle in Linda's words. And she has this great gift of hospitality. And so it's this house of hospitality. So we've had 40 people come and stay with us in the first 18 months. But it's a totally different way of doing that as opposed to saying, wow, look at us, look at the size of house we live in. And believe me, I'm not perfect at this. So some of this is aspirational, but I can tell you that it's the path to freedom for me.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us in this room at various stages of having acquired wealth or in that process of what's the balance between enjoying it in appropriate ways, what's the balance between managing it, distributing it, giving it, and what is too much. These are tough questions. But you talk about work as the crucible for your faith. Most people think, well, no, my faith has grown through being involved in my church or a Bible study group or something. But I hear you saying that you really, it was the marketplace where your faith sort of exploded and came alive. Is that fair? Or?
No, it's absolutely the case. Well, you can see why. I mean, the crisis of meaning work was out of my work life, which led me to God, which led me to a completely transformed perspective of work. And that I'm convinced that we have to be transformed ourselves before we can transform society. Gandhi, become the change you want to see. But so yes, it has absolutely been the case. And for me, what's happened is there's no so that to my work life. I don't work so that I can retire one day and then really do what matters. I don't work so that we can make a pile of money and give it away. With this inverted perspective of life, and it comes out of Colossians, the mystery that's been hidden throughout the ages is that Christ in you, the hope of glory, that everything out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks, so that everything we do is an expression of us. It's from the inside out. So loving my wife of 32 years, or our boys, or being at work, or being involved with the Harvard graduate students down in Central America, or having the opportunity to talk to all of you, these are all expressions of who we are made to be. And so in the same way with work, so all of it is equally important to me. And so my work life now has come alive. I would have quit when I was back, at 35, CFO of this company and struggling with these questions. I would have quit. I was either going to figure it out or I was going to go do Mother Teresa thing. Because I said, I just can't live this divided life. And I'm so grateful that God just kept me in the darkness to see it through, to now have this transformed perspective that now I come alive through my work life. In fact, after Nextel Partners was sold, my wife and I took what we call a purposeful pause, and didn't know if I'd go back to work or not, and we ended up being 3 years. But after 2 years, we both looked at each other and said, I think I want to go back to work. And that's why. And that's when I ended up coming to Vontage, because I feel so deeply about the power of business to contribute to society in the ways we're talking about, that it just brings joy to me.
Question. A lot of us, particularly say in the Northeast, in a place like Greenwich, we wonder, well, what's appropriate? Should we even be trying to talk about our faith at work? Or obviously it's sort of a delicate space. For many people, it's an intimidating prospect, a no-go zone. Do you at work sort of run around with a bumper sticker says, honk if you love Jesus, or do you accost people in the hallway with Bible tracts? Or how do you sort of, what's the, in addition to your actions, how do you think about this, what some would call evangelism?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm going to give you a two-part answer. First is there's never a moment when I don't talk about my work. I like the
You don't talk about your work.
About my faith, excuse me. Francis of Assisi said, preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. So for me, this life, this surrendered life that becomes occupied by God, and if it really grows to the point where it is no longer we who live, but out of my faith tradition, Christ in us, then all of that becomes an expression of it. But I'll give you a couple of examples. I don't hold Bible studies at work. I think in senior positions, it can be very difficult because it can lead to the impression of favoritism.
Right.
So I will describe it when asked. I'll give you two examples of how this comes. One was in Brazil. So I told you the pain of that for me. And at the end of this, I was in the office in Sao Paulo early in the morning, and the assistant came up, Ana Lima, and she said, oh, the cleaning lady would like to clean your office, would be okay. And I didn't speak Portuguese. And I said, sure, have her come in. So she came in and she cleaned my office. And then Ana Lima came sort of sheepishly up to the door, and she said, do you mind if I ask you a question? And I said, no, anything. And she said, are you a Christian? And I said, and I don't tend to use that word. I describe myself as a follower of Jesus, but I knew what she meant. And I said, yes, I am. She said, why do you ask? She said, and it's hard for me to even talk about this to this day, this was 10 years ago, she said, because something's different. She said, I know you've had to go through some very, very difficult things. We had to lay off 1,500 people. We tried to do it with a sense of dignity, by the way. We didn't have a single lawsuit. We provided outplacement and all these kinds of things. But she said, I know you've had to do some very difficult things, and yet there's a sense of calm about you that has permeated this whole company, and I just wanted you to know that. And she walked out of my office, and I just burst into tears, because it was just a sense of saying, thank you, Lord, that it actually is making a difference.
And there's also, to me, a beauty in the power dynamics that the person who ministered to your soul was the lady emptying garbage cans. There's a beauty in that. And I'll bet she is a bit like that bus driver of the shuttle bus. I'll bet she has to find something, or she doesn't, no matter how humble it is.
She absolutely does. There's another example, and I've had to do some really tough negotiations in my career. One of the top three was the very, and I won't describe which one it was because I worked for public companies, and that's difficult.
So a generic company,
generic
which
company.
you were involved with once, right?
Yes. We should get
non-denominational.
That's right. Yeah, Larry the cable guy to help us out with this.
And you were dealing with some sharks and tough hombres, yeah?
Some very difficult people, and I was working with two people, a CEO and a chief legal officer, who both happened to be Jewish, and this was tough. We went through 10 rounds of negotiation, and you know how negotiations work. You usually get closer and you finally close the gap. We would go through 3 rounds, and the other side would change the deal and start over. And in fact, one of the board members of this company said, you just have to take as a starting point that these people have no soul. And then you'll be able to, well, I don't think I'd go quite that far.
People have no soul.
Yeah. But we were in the midst of this, and the chief legal officer said, Barry, you seem very calm about this. How is that the case? I mean, this is tough. Why aren't you just screaming at these people? And I said,
What did you say to that?
I said, well, I could answer that question at various levels. Would you like me to answer it at the deepest level? And he said, yes. I said, tell me how you really do
Did
it.
you close the door and have a little chat?
So we were in, well, I didn't have a door in my office, but I was in my cube, and I pulled out of my briefcase my little travel Bible, and he said, wow, that thing's really worn out.
I should have used yours this morning instead of mine.
Yeah, it's really worn out, it's falling apart. And I said, yeah, my hope is that at least some of the words on these pages go from the pages to my heart. I mean, that's my hope, and that's why it's so worn out. But I said, here's how I deal with it. And he was of Jewish faith, and I said, it comes out of your own faith tradition, out of Psalm 73. And if that psalm starts.
Remind us what that one is.
You could probably quote it, I'm sure.
Right.
But Psalm 73 starts off about the psalmist is writing about the prosperity of the wicked and how they succeed. And then right as is the case with so many psalms, it turns in the middle. And it says, when I tried to understand all this, it was oppressive to me until I entered the sanctuary of God. And then I understood their final destiny. And I said, that's what gives me peace, is that we're all going to be buck naked before God at some point, including me. And they are too. And there is a final destiny to this. And that's what enables me to be calm. There's a friend of mine did a eulogy for another friend, and the way he described him was to say, fixed as he was in the things of eternity, he could sit loosely in the things of time. And I really think that that is one of the manifestations of our faith, is that because we have this eternal perspective, and we know that we will all come into that place where judged, it gave me the freedom to not have to scream at these guys.
That's actually a wonderful story to me on many levels. First of all, that someone would ask you that question, which is a real compliment, and also the gentle way in which you responded. It's, I can give you the deep, and then that gave you and me a chance to visit, and that's very powerful. That's very powerful. I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll open up to thoughts or questions that some of you may have based on the conversation so far. And that question is, so we've been talking about Vontage, where you are, and I want to sort of be making this like, but I won't do that. But you just yesterday, it was announced that you're leaving. You've offered your resignation, and you're going to do something else. Can you tell us just real quickly, what are you going to go do? You have to get through the next quarter, right, and call your statements. But
so it's a very amicable departure. I depart with the best of friends, really great relationships. In fact, I've honestly been overwhelmed with the outpouring of support. This has been the most challenging thing other than Brazil I've ever done, and I have never felt so loved. And I think as we become smaller, that gets more real. And so, so what I'm going to go do is, I wasn't looking for a job. Vontage has been a massive turnaround. Great shape. It went from losing $50 million to making $165 million in EBITDA in 4 years. So $200 million swing. And so it's in solid shape. Still has to grow. It's not growing, but it's really on solid foundation relative to where it was. So I wasn't looking, but got recruited to join a development stage company in the biofuels industry. So this is a new gig for me. It's one of those companies that has some very exciting technology. They make
corn cobs.
Yeah, they make gasoline and jet fuel out of corn cobs and wood chips. And remarkable as that is, the science has actually proven out. We were talking about that, Michael, before. And this company has raised quite a lot of money so far. The investors are GE.
Fully funded business plan, right?
Well, that implies you have revenues, which this company doesn't have yet. So my job will be to raise some more money, but so I'm really excited about it. It has I think a realistic shot of being a multi-billion-dollar company in a few years, and also contributing to society in some very tangible ways, energy independence, and it's also massively beneficial to the environment by extracting carbon. So that's what I'm going to go do.
That's terrific. And also one of the PS is not driven by a tax incentive model. It will be intrinsically, the model is intrinsically profitable.
Yeah, it is. Yep. So.
Who would like to ask Barry any questions, anything about what he's shared so far, or something on your mind?
I was very deeply struck by your attitude toward, I'll call it the goodness of your being that you manifested outward as you touch with that. The reality of running a business, a huge business, is how do you take care of the people that are beneath you at all different levels? Did you have the thought of, yes, I want to, within whatever limits, make sure that the people were taken care of, or is it just, cutthroat, bottom line, oh, I'm a wonderful person, straighten off my halo, but, forget about the people who are actually making you successful down there driving the bus. So I want to see, what your thought thinking was at it, because it's a hard one, especially nowadays, when the middle class seemingly is being challenged in the United States and disappearing.
No, it's a great question, and let me give you a two-part answer. First, about the goodness in me. That's a half-truth. that I'm convinced that out of Romans 8, that there is within each of us the sinful nature and the divine, and that line goes right through the center of my heart, and that I am, as I get older, more deeply in touch with my own foibles. And so the closer I get to God, the more I realize how far I am from Him. And so please don't, even though I'm on a higher chair, don't put me on a pedestal. So please, I mean that very seriously. And with regard to the people, yes, I mean, back to the role of business in society, I mentioned one of the things for me is creating an environment that enables people to grow into the full expression of themselves. So a huge part of what I love is seeing people achieve their potential. I mean, I hired an assistant who was home for 16 years. She started as an assistant, she became the human resources director. I mean, what fun is that to see that? Or even at Vontage in this hurricane, I'll give you a very tangible example. We have, because we're in New Jersey, a lot of people were down, 38 employees at Vontage either lost their entire homes or most everything. So a few days after the storm, we said, the company's going to put up $100,000 and match dollar for dollar the contributions from our employees. Within a week, we raised $250,000, and we distributed it to those people. We found 10 apartments for people for 3 months because it was really hard to find things, and you cannot believe how grateful people were. And so it's really important to understand that that's the case. And I kind of have this inverted view of the pyramid, that, and the higher, of course, God always thinks about things the opposite, the way the world says it is that the higher you get, the more people should serve us, and yet no, that it's really the opposite, is that the higher we get, the more in an organization, the more responsibility we have to serve the organization, because there are many more people doing a lot more work than we are. So how can we release their capabilities to achieve the goals of the organization? Back to my initial decision in college, that is what it's about to me, is to get us aligned on those goals and to release them to achieve their potential.
Terrific. Other question? Yeah, Holly.
I wanted to know how you sorted out managing your time so that you're not overly focused on the output and you're still making sure you have time to get the input.
Yeah, that's a great question. So to me, about how to manage our time is the question. To me, there are two dimensions to this. First is balance, which is kind of the horizontal view of the job of life. How much time do I spend with Linda and the boys and at work and on boards and all that? The other view is congruence. I have struggled with both. The deeper question for me was congruence, which is how does everything that
you and God, so the
between me and my purpose in life. So how does what I'm doing in this moment connect with my purpose in life? You with me on that distinction? On the balance piece, however, I blew that enormously early on. So when we were married for 6 years before we had kids. When Mark was born, I came home. I was telling the guys before, I came home near Christmas time when Mark was 6 months old, and I had these tremendous chest pains. And then in the space of 20 minutes broke out in hives, and Linda said she was home with our little son. She said, well, you better drive yourself to the hospital, because I'm here with this kid. But, so I did. I drove myself to the hospital, and then the same thing happened the next day. And I thought, what is going on here? I thought I was having a heart attack. Well, it turned out it was stress. And the source of the stress was the way I wanted to be spending my time was not the way I was spending my time. Before Mark was born, it was no problem. I looked at my day timer, and I was spending 8 hours a day in meetings, and then I was doing my work after that. Well, I did not want to be spending that extra time. I wanted to be home. So I took a time management course. It wouldn't have mattered what kind of time management course. I said, I gotta fix this thing. So out of that came an understanding of what balance was for it. And I wrote it down on a 3x5 card, and I carry it with me to this day. And that was Mark's 25 years old. But for us, it was, and it varies a little bit week to week, but it was 50 to 55 hours a week at work, traveling less than 30% of the time, working out 3 days a week, praying every day, which has grown into at least an hour a day, not being on any more than 2 external things, boards, and being home for dinner every night when I'm in town. And that was, Lynn and I worked that out together, and I can tell you that has been pretty true. And that when I got out of whack, like when I was living in Denver and I made 16 trips to Brazil in 3 years and then moved there, I was traveling 50% of the time. It was too much. And I could tell I was getting disconnected from our kids. But our boys and Lynn and I end up speaking sometimes together, and they ask the kids, so, okay, now, we've heard all those fancy words from your dad. What was it really like? Because that's all that matters. It doesn't matter what I say. And the boys said, Dad was there for us. He worked hard, but when I had this little rule that said, if the kids ever asked me to play, I would never say no. And it's 2 minutes to a 3-year-old. But what they remember is that you said yes, not that, maybe another time. So we weren't perfect at it, but it was an agreement with my wife and me, so it was our family deal. And Stephen Covey has this great saying, and I'll end with this, but says, it's easy to say no when you have a stronger yes burning inside of you. And so for me, I had said yes to the family, yes to these other things. And so when people ask me to be on boards, I said, I have this little rule, I can only do 2 at a time, and my dance card's full. So it's a dynamic thing, but we have such demanding jobs that if we are not clear about those boundaries, we have infinite jobs that the world will define our lives for us instead of having it defined by us. And so that for me has been what it's taken, is to be absolute bulldog about what that looks like for us.
Well, I think you speak to a lot of people. I'm taking notes on that myself. It's powerful. It's a powerful point. I think we ought to honor our time. We have a tradition. By the way, as people slip out, you shouldn't take that personally. People need to go to their training desks or meetings. And I should have told you in advance. You must think no one's interested. There's 1 or 2 people slip out. We're going to close, as is our tradition, exactly at 8:15, which is where we are now. But as part of that, Patrick, would you come up? Our resident tenor. Your day job is the CEO program you run, but you happen to have a passion and love for music. As you get set up,
You're all going to join me because I sang last night at the Leader to Leader Institute, so I'm blown in.
as he's going to pass out some song sheets. But before we do, would you all join me in giving Barry a wonderful round of applause?